Day 988 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 704,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,400 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 10 tanks, 20 APVs, 24 artillery, and one new USA president-elect. Not exactly a hardware loss, but jumping right into that, President Volodymyr Zelensky has already spoken with the 47th President of the United States to congratulate him on his election victory, where Zelensky said in his nightly address that both agreed to maintain a close dialogue with an emphasis spoken on the importance of strong US leadership for global stability and peace. So that's a tick for Ukraine, the congratulatory call. Meanwhile, where was Putin's congratulatory call to Trump? Well, the Kremlin announced that President Putin currently has no intention of congratulating President-elect Donald Trump, with Kremlin spokesperson Peskov naming the USA an unfriendly country. And so we see already a lack of dialogue that puts relations with Russia down for the count. I mean, no dialogue doesn't help much when your country is slowly teetering on the brink of economic collapse from becoming the most sanctioned country on earth now. So it is all a little bit odd, where as per Russian state media TV, a Trump election victory was one of Russia's biggest hopes to take a different and much more slate-cleaning approach as opposed to what they've been getting from the Biden administration. At least that's been the general Russian mindset. Then around the same time, NATO chief Mark Rutte emphasized that supporting Ukraine is a minor expense compared to military budgets, warning that an increasingly unchecked Russia with its Iranian and North Korean alliances poses a significant global threat. Where he also stated, and I'm paraphrasing here, but that the bumping up of all the NATO countries' annual military budgets, their defense budgets, is a small price to pay for global peace and stability, going far as to say, quote, "The question is, can we afford not to?" Also, French President Macron and Trump also engaged in a productive 25-minute phone call, emphasizing their commitment to fostering peace and stability, with the leaders reaffirming their collaborative efforts during this timely discussion. Then on the topic of Macron, or France, German Defense Minister Pistorius heads to France for urgent talks with his counterpart Lecornu following Trump's election victory. They'll be discussing the implications for his win, future support for Ukraine, and the direction of European defense policy. In other words, coalescing to increase their defense budget spendings all the way up to 2% of GDP per country. Now, currently, 21 of the 32 NATO member states have reached this defense spending level, something that Trump has been for a long time a big proponent of. So the European allies within NATO, 11 out of the 32 to go, with most of the remainder having previously pledged compliance to get up to the 2%. But the dates are anywhere between 2025 and 2033, depending on the country. However, given this new geopolitical environment, I think we can all expect some big changes to occur pretty soon, whether or not a European country is above or below 2% of GDP for military spending. And you know what? Perhaps ironically, the practical effect from the outcome of a Trump presidency may actually cause hundreds of billions more euros spent on defense collectively by European countries. Noting that the nuance in the irony there is that since many would argue that Putin had a keen preference for a Trump presidency, and yet a Trump presidency ironically makes for a more locked and loaded Europe. It's almost like a backfire boomerang effect, just like NATO expansion as a result of this war, where Finland's joining of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization added an additional 1,350 kilometers of NATO-Russia border. Now, to put that figure in context, just before joining, the NATO-Russia border was only 1,200 kilometers long, making for, that's right, more than a doubling of border length. So maybe there's an outside chance that Putin is actually an undercover CIA operative. Unlikely, but it does capture the imagination to playfully speculate on these things. And then also, very interestingly, on the adjacent topic, the Javelin ATGM, the anti-tank guided missile, was provided to Ukraine as part of a wider lethal aid package from the US during the first Trump administration back in 2018, during the events of the Donbass and Crimea, which at the time was a shift in previous policy under that of the Obama administration, where no lethal aid was provided, but done so as a means to not escalate the problems any further. But escalation is tricky, even if your heart is in the right place, because given the later full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it may actually appear that traditionally perceived non-escalation tactics, just hanging back, only seeks to cause Russia to escalate the situation even further. Whereas the traditionally perceived escalation tactics, for instance providing a decent supply of military aid, may in fact have a longer-term de-escalatory outcome. Kind of like standing up to a bully. Then, as part of a brief video, we'll head to the map today and start out in Russia's Kursk Oblast, where we see more reports from Ukraine and the US about an Asian army in Europe, with in fact further video surfacing of North Korean soldiers gearing up, getting out, switching from civilian buses to military trucks. Even more footage surfaced that allegedly show North Korean soldiers in the Kursk region, where in the audio feed, the professional army, the professional Russian army, is seen to be attempting to teach the North Koreans how to swear in Russian. It also appears that the Russian army is continuing the North Korean integration headaches. This time, the diverse and inclusive Moscovian army launches the pamphlet called Recognize Own to help soldiers identify their Korean, Yakut, Tibetan, and Buryat counterparts. I wonder if North Korean soldiers will receive a similar pamphlet as well. But then more painful an experience was how a Russian soldier expressed frustration over North Korean troops enjoying superior living conditions. Because meanwhile, Putin's more elite soldiers are relegated to third-rate status, sleeping or living in mud, as they say. Though I do expect that it's just the first round of North Korean soldiers getting this treatment, to show the supreme leader Kim Jong-un, the provider of much of the Russian artillery shells, that Russia is an exemplary, top-tier military. But even still, when your own soldiers are comparing conditions with one of the most isolated regimes in the world, you know things are bad. The Kremlin might control the narrative, but the reality on the ground is something entirely different, where we continue to see morale sinking inside of the Russian military. But as for the map, Russian forces are said to be repairing defenses along the border near Novy Put in the Kursk region, and tensions are said to be high here, but at the same time, repairing cope cone defenses means Russia is looking to protect what land they have here and not gearing up to expand. Then briefly on the map into Ukraine today, headed all the way down to the Donbass, where Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade, Incognito the name, for their drone team, repelled a Russian mechanized attack in the Seversk direction. 2 tanks, 4 infantry fighting vehicles, and 1 MTLB were either damaged or destroyed. Then some further activity was seen just to the rear of Toretsk, about 7 kilometers or 4 miles northeast, as Ukraine's 28th Mechanized Brigade conducts strikes on Dylivka. Then nearby to here, just further south, Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drones relentlessly target fleeing Russian infantry in Krasnohorivka, clearly keeping the pressure on the Russian forces so as to not allow them to consolidate any extra land here, effectively dismantling their attempts to invade. Then headed down a bit further, as for the Pokrovsk direction, a Russian BMP-2 is destroyed, with a Russian soldier showing the outcome of that engagement. Then there was more activity to be seen once again at Katarinivka, in the Kharkova direction. This time, another Russian infantry fighting vehicle destroyed, a BMP-3. So dribs and dribs we're looking at here. Then interestingly, overnight in Crimea, with Russian claims of a ballistic missile threat of up to 10 missiles, I presume they refer to ATACMS missiles there, but also 20 Ukrainian-produced Neptune anti-ship missiles and 200 to 1,000 UAVs. Seems highly unlikely, especially given how they said it was a simultaneous attack. But one thing's for sure, the Russian military is getting better at scaring themselves. They realize there's a threat out there. A genuine force to be reckoned with. Then also, quite interestingly, somewhere in the east, an Su-25, a Russian jet, has been added to the Russian visually confirmed losses. But what I find most impressive is, did you notice the wear on those tires? So Russia finally mustered up the strength to perform another Su-25 sortie, which they're usually in pairs, where they face not only the threat of Ukrainian air defenses, but also the threat of poor maintenance as well. And that's only what we can see. This is just unacceptable. You need adequate tread. I mean, especially this time of year, where we're coming up to not just the wet weather, but the slippery winter weather. The snow, the ice, the everything. This doesn't make sense. This shouldn't be this way. Then on the map, into Russia, briefly to yesterday morning, where Ukrainian drones launched attacks at Kaspisk, in Dagestan, home to Russia's Caspian Sea flotilla. The attacks, executed by Ukraine's GUR military intelligence agency, reportedly resulted in damage to Russian naval assets. Notably, it was reported that the missile ships, Tatarstan and Dagestan, along with two smaller Buryan M-class corvettes, sustained some damage. Now, this operation marked Ukraine's first successful strike on a Russian port in the Caspian Sea, demonstrating an expansion of its operational reach in fact in this case, exactly 1,000 kilometers away from the front lines, so about 600 miles away. You would think that the warships have armaments to deal with a drone that is essentially a remote-controlled Cessna light aircraft in this case, or to at least have the air defenses to protect the naval assets. From what turns out to be an old favourite, the Ukrainian Foxbat, quite big for a drone and slow. Even still, flies through 1,000 kilometers of Russian airspace, and that's just as the crow flies. So where are the S-300s and S-400 air defense systems Russia boasts of? Well, we're looking for them. Then headed across to a quick Russian military mobilization blunder to round it all off with today, guys. So a rear commander from Putin's Bars 20 unit, call sign Vishnya, urgently requests warm clothing for 170 troops now dealing with freezing conditions at the front lines. He makes a point of it a couple of times that the unit received nothing from the army. So once again, the self-professed superpower that is having trouble getting warm clothes for their troops, and on many occasions food and water, and weapons, and vehicles of all types they are missing out on. So amid the countless reports of an impoverished Russian military that we see, I would think by now most can accept that it's a pretty undeniable situation for Russia. But for all of those naysayers and deniers and Russian comment trolls out there, just, look no further than this guy's face. It tells the whole story. So that's it for today, guys. A shorter video, because I learned what burnout feels like today. So I had to keep care of the Juzzie, and I hope you guys are keeping care of yourselves too. So thanks again for watching, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!